In visiting with someone the other day, they were struggling with some elements of our church history. And specifically, they were looking at the fact that it appears that the priesthood ban for African Americans in the church began with Brigham Young in the Territorial Congress, allowing slave owners to bring slaves into the state, essentially making the state of Deseret a slave state. And because of that, wanted to then discount the fact that a prophet of God would not do something like that. As we look through the history of church of prophets all through centuries, and then certainly as for Latter-day Saints, we see prophets making mistakes, and yet these are inspired men and women doing the best that they know how to do. A simple example is Joseph Fielding Smith saying in pre-1969, man will never land on the moon. And then we did, and he was asked by the press about that, and he said, "Oh, I made a mistake, didn't I?" When we have looked at the priesthood ban, for instance, and the fact that in the early 1970s, as Spencer Kimball began looking at that and wondering about that, and then as prophet, he was praying about it, that finally coming to the decision that the ban needed to be lifted, that he needed then to enlist the support and to win over, if you will, Delbert Stapley and Marky Peterson and Bruce R. McConkie and others, that this change needed to be made. Sometimes people have looked at that and said, well, it was God's will that it not be changed to 1978. And that could certainly be true. It is interesting to me, however, that just a few months after the priesthood ban was lifted and everybody was celebrating that it had happened, Bruce R. McConkie goes to BYU, he speaks to the faculty, and he says, everything that we have said to this moment about this issue was wrong. Everything I have written about this issue was wrong. Not that it was inspired and God changed it. It was, we got it wrong and we received a revelation that we needed to overturn decades of tradition and thought on this matter. We got it wrong. Now, as we take a look at our own testimonies, I think it's critical that we be able to have the kind of testimonies that aren't so brittle, that don't allow prophetic leaders to be human. And in fact, it makes them, in my eyes, far more powerful when they are receiving inspiration and guidance to do what they need to do, and at times make the best decisions that they know how to make, and then recognize that it was wrong. I think the first presidency would say that a few years ago, when they placed a restriction on kids that were born into same-sex marriages, that we were saying they couldn't be baptized until they were 18 and disavowed same-sex marriage. 18 months later, the church stepped forward and said, basically, we made a mistake. That was wrong. Now, as members of the church, when we look at this, we pretend that we're not looking for perfection, but we want prophetic leadership, meaning sometimes in our mind that they will never make mistakes. They won't lead us astray. Wilford Woodruff was right. Won't lead the church astray, but there are going to be times, there are going to be painful decisions that get made when a stake president and a bishop sign off on the tragedy at Mountain Meadows Massacre. Horrible mistake by inspired leaders who, if we looked at the other decisions that those men made, probably a lot of great callings and the great things that they did. But we are human and we're capable of making these kind of mistakes. How about we need to begin to extend to prophets the same type of mercy that hopefully the Lord extends to us. And that means no longer having to hold them to prophets should always know about everything that's going on, and if they ever miss something, then it's proof that they're not a prophet. That's too high an expectation standard for anybody on this earth, let alone these men and women trying to do the best that they know how to do. It's time for a new paradigm of prophets, as Patrick Mason would say. And this new paradigm needs to allow for fallibility and mistakes. It's our job to follow as best we can, and then to allow them over time to make the changes that they need to make. Thanks.